This video is about the recent Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, but here's what most people don't know and don't seem to be talking about. Orthodox saints, and even some Catholic ones, have been predicting this moment for years. And now it's actually happened, and the question is, what comes next? Because if these prophecies are right, and I'm going to walk you through them in this video, then this isn't just another headline, it's the spark, the beginning of what some have called the great events. And I did a lot of digging to pull this together. I did research in Greek and Russian online, these sources. I had AI help me do what would normally be days of research. And I've compiled probably the most comprehensive, complete summary of all of this in English of how these Catholic and Orthodox prophecies line up with what's unfolding in real time. You're not going to find this anywhere else. So buckle up. Here we go. Let's start with this. It's creepy how specific this prophecy was. So there was a guy named Elder Theodoros, and he was a Greek Orthodox elder of Crete. He died in 2016, and he said something that people brushed off at the time. He said this: one morning, while you're drinking your coffee, you'll hear that the Jews have struck Persia's nuclear program, and then the great events begin. And that's the whole prophecy. Just that quiet warning. And then yesterday, it happened. And you might have actually been drinking your coffee this morning when you found out, because it happened yesterday at night. So in this country, and it happened over there in like the middle of the night. So they probably found out while they were drinking their coffee. So Israeli planes and missiles struck these nuclear targets deep in Iran, and this isn't just skirmishes or rumors, but like a full military operation. They're calling it Operation Rising Lion. So the great events, which are supposed to come after this, aren't really defined in detail. But in Orthodox prophetic talk, it usually means something world-shaking, like war, collapse, lead up to the Antichrist. I know that sounds dramatic, but this is not coming from a fringe internet forum. These are canonized saints, highly venerated elders in monasteries that have been around for centuries. And Elder Theodoros wasn't alone. Now, there's another prophecy from a saint you probably have heard of that gives us more detail. He talks about rivers of blood, the fall of Turkey, even the rebuilding of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. So that would be St. Paisios. Here's what he said. He was a Greek Orthodox monk on Mount Athos, passed away in the 90s, but before he died, he made a bunch of predictions, and some that have actually already come true. He talked about Greece's financial crisis, tensions between Russia and Turkey, a war in the Middle East, a big one. And he said the war would break out near the Euphrates River, which flows through Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, very close to Iran. He said Turkey would provoke things, Russia would get involved, and eventually Constantinople would be taken back by Orthodox Christians. And he even said a third of Turks would die, a third would convert to Christianity, a third would die, and a third would flee to Mesopotamia, which no one wants to see that kind of devastation, but that's what he said. And then when he was asked when all this would kick off, he said it would start when Israel attacked Iran, just like Elder Theodoros. So we're left wondering, is that what just happened? And I know it's intense, all of this. You're probably sitting there like, wait, are we about to live through the end of the world? Take a breath. I'm not here to panic anyone. I'm just here to unpack what's been said. And let's just understand what the saints actually taught. Not fearmonger or not sugarcoat. So what actually happened yesterday? Israel launched a full-on surprise attack, and they call it Operation Rising Lion. Fighter jets, missiles, the works, targets Iran's nuclear enrichment site at Natanz, parts of Tehran, missile bases, and key military command centers. They killed some of Iran's top brass, including the head of IRGC, and which is like the army, like it's called like the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command. I think that's what that stands for. Don't quote me. And Iran immediately launched drones back at Israel, which were intercepted. They sent, yeah. So the UN called an emergency meeting. Russia and China condemned Israel. The US just said we didn't authorize this, but Iran's not buying it. And honestly, I'm not buying it either. And now Iran's saying they will retaliate fully, and they're calling this the start of the war. And so if this is just the start, this is just the beginning, it's a hell of a beginning. So here's where things get weird again. There was a 4th century saint called Saint Ephraim the Syrian, who talked about a war breaking out between the Roman Empire and the Persians, with the Jews somehow involved in the conflict. Does that sound sort of familiar? Saint Ephraim, he's a shared saint between Eastern and Oriental Orthodox, and I think he's maybe even recognized by the Catholics too, because 4th century, that's pre-schism, so he's probably a Catholic saint too. He wrote about moral collapse, wars in Persia, kingdoms rising against kingdom. At one point, he said there will be a war with the Persians, and that Jewish people will become the adversaries of Rome. We're not living in the Roman Empire anymore, but a lot of people interpret that symbolic Rome as the West, the US, Europe, NATO, and Persia obviously is Iran. Now Persia, it used to be called Persia, now it's called Iran. And so here we are, Iran clashing with Israel, US hanging in the background, trying to say that we're not involved. But if this escalates, everyone gets pulled in. So, I don't know. This old dusty prophecy doesn't seem so dusty anymore. Now, there's also some Catholic prophecies. So at Fatima, there were allegedly some apparitions of Mary, like 100 years ago. She said that Our Lady warned that Russia would spread her errors throughout the world and that the entire nations would be annihilated unless people repented. And now we've got Russia deep in Ukraine, Iran and Russia working together, the world walking a tightrope. Then there was Blessed Elena Aiello, who was an Italian nun in the 1950s, said there would be a war that started in the east and spread to the west, and she specifically mentioned Russia battling America. And there's a prophecy from Akita, Japan, fire falling from the sky, wiping out much of humanity. Sounds like a nuclear bomb, possibly. So Catholic mystics have seen something coming too. And maybe this is where we should stop and say, okay, whether you believe in prophecy or not, isn't it at least a little chilling how much of this lines up? So the big question, that's the big question, right? Do we take this seriously and prepare for something huge, or is it just another regional conflict that fizzles out like so many before? And no one knows, but the saints gave us patterns, and right now those patterns are starting to light up like warning signals. Jerusalem, Iran, Russia, Turkey, maybe China, all are players on the board. And some Orthodox prophecies say that after this global war, a kind of peace will follow for a short time before the final deception of the Antichrist begins. But others say it depends on repentance. The war is only inevitable if we refuse to change, that we can delay it and even prevent it by turning back to God. So maybe we're not doomed, but maybe it's just a wake-up call, or maybe we are. Who knows? I'm no prophet. I'm not a saint. I'm just a guy who saw this headline yesterday and was like, wait, this feels familiar. Now, another thing I did forget to mention earlier is that the saint from Crete, he did say that the next thing we're going to see is that Erdogan is going to fall, the leader of Turkey. So that's obviously going to play into all of this somehow. But I'm going to pull up another document that I have, because I just give me 1 second, because I did a lot of in-depth research. Hold on a second. So I was able to find some some really interesting, um, lesser known things. So I got a list here. Um, so the Elder Theodoros prophecy, it was time stamped. And this is very important to know because he said you're going to be drinking your coffee and you'll hear the Jews struck Persia's nuclear program. And that's when the great events begin. And so we have to remember when this was happening, it happened last night, American time. I'm in Michigan. And that would have been the early morning hours of in the Middle East. So they woke up, those in that part of the world, drank their coffee. So he told this to private monastics and not the public, and it only came out years later. And that's a part people have often ignored, but it's important because if this had happened in the evening over there, we could say, is it a coincidence? I don't know, but it happened in the morning. So people in Israel probably did get up, make their coffee, turn on the news, and be, oh, you know. So Erdogan will fall around the same time. So most people don't know that part about the Theodoros prophecy in relation to Iran. So the full quote includes a warning that, quote unquote, around the same time Erdogan will fall. That's literally all that Theodoros said. He said those two parts. They said that, well, even as of this week, actually, Erdogan is facing unprecedented political and economic crisis in Turkey. The Turkish lira is plunging. There's talk of internal party dissent. That part of the prophecy might be unfolding in real time too. And then another part of all of this, which was really surprising for me, is that Paisios said Constantinople would be returned voluntarily by Russia after they defeat Turkey. Which sort of makes sense because they're an Orthodox country, but... So this means Russia's going to play a role probably in destroying Turkey's power and in fulfilling a divine realignment of lands tied to Orthodoxy. But they're aligned with Iran militarily. That's kind of complicated, so I don't know. Now, 6 nuclear scientists and Iran's chief of staff were killed in this strike. And the mainstream prophecy commentators haven't picked up on this. They've said the recent Israeli strike wiped out 6 nuclear scientists and Iran's top military commander. All in one night. That level of strategic decapitation wasn't even mentioned in most headlines. If you go back to ancient Christian prophecy, like St. Ephraim, or even the apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius, they all talk about a sudden leadership level blow that comes before the great shaking begins. The prophecy says the kingdom will be cut off at the head. And for Iran, that just happened. Pseudo-Ephraim foretold wars with the Persians, that the Jews would be involved. We're going back to that 4th century guy. We talked about the adversaries of Rome, and Rome is maybe the West. But basically, I'm going to conclude this video with Elder Paisios, and he gave a list, essentially, of what's going to happen next. So if this is the beginning of the prophecy, we're going into the end times now. So Turkey, what will happen next is Turkey will provoke Greece, probably after the fall of Erdogan. A war will erupt in the Middle East. Russia will invade Turkey. Constantinople will be handed over to the Greeks. And the Jews will rebuild their temple, their 3rd temple in Jerusalem, and finally, the Antichrist will appear. So if you like this video, want to see more religious content from me, please like, comment, and subscribe because it really helps with the algorithm. Thank you.